54 of the book of Yeshayahu, the groupings of consolation. And maybe you remember we read this Haftarah not long ago in the book of Dvarim, correct? You remember which Parashat we read it? Ki Teitzei, that's right. Roni, so why read it again? That's apparently Chazal said that we should read it again. It's obviously the reason mentioned because of the Brit that God made with Noach. Maybe we can see it right away in verse 9. Ki mei Noach zot li, asher nishbati mi'avor mei Noach od al haaretz. Kei nishbati miktof alayich u'migaor bach. So God's promise, Yeshayahu says, that the waters of Noach, He's promised about that they're not going to come again on the land to erase mankind and erase society. And the swearing of God, of course, is as strong as the creation of heaven and earth. So the Shavua to Israel here in this chapter about consolation and redemption is as strong as the Shavua, the swearing of Hashem that He swore to Noach. Okay? Even if there's some beautiful music in the corridor, we blend with it, we flow with it, that's not a problem. The fact that when we open up here in chapter 54, Roni Akara, Lo Yalada, and we see that Zion is compared to a woman, and you ask yourself, well, is this the novelty of this chapter? Does it begin here? And the answer we're going to see, you know what? Let's view 4 different prophecies of Yeshayahu, each of them comparing Tzion to a woman. Okay? I learned this short once from Rabbi Hanan Samet, one of the prominent Tanakh teachers of our generation. And I want to share with you this idea, because here we're going to see the term Bat Tzion, and we see it many times here. In other words, the woman of Zion, that is the prophecy of consolation. And we like to know, why is Israel compared to a woman? And she's called Bat Tzion. So as we're about to see 4 different prophecies, where this is not the first one here in chapter 54, but you should know that when Yeshayahu is looking at Am Yisrael in the land of Israel, of the upcoming Galut to Babylon, and from there coming out, and also talking about the future after the second Commonwealth, we can really see 2 types of women. One could be called Bat Bavel, and the other can be called Bat Tzion. And often we see comparisons, similarities, and of course differences when the prophet is talking about Israel being in Galut, and there, if we're likened to a woman, we're called the daughter of Babylon. And when we're coming back to the land of Israel, we're called a different woman, Bat Tzion. And you should know today, a favorite name for many families of calling a daughter, they call her Bat Tzion. Okay, my wife has a niece, her brother's daughter is called Bat Tzion. It's a very common name to find, a name that's beloved, used in the prophecies of Yeshayahu. Historically, you should know, when the Romans were ruling here, and later on, we did archaeological work, we really found after the destruction of Yerushalayim and the Second Temple, different types of coins, of course, which they're even finding today in all their diggings. And on some of the coins, it's noted 2 different notations. One is a very prominent looking woman that's dressed up, that's really looking well. Whereas the second one on the coin is a woman sitting down to the ground, leaning over. It seems that her eyes are looking down as well. She looks like a widow, or she looks like a woman in captivity, that her entire world is destroyed. Okay, we'll mention that in one of the prophecies regarding captivity. And we're also praying very much now and learning Torah and teaching Torah on behalf of the Jewish captives. About 199 of them have been told, their families have been told. So we pray that they're going to be saved as soon as possible and brought back to Israel. And our learning should be dedicated also to the victory of Israel through the IDF and all the security people. So the coins that the Romans coined with two different women, they wanted to put down the Jewish people. They say, the Gvira, the Geveret, the more prominent woman, that's Rome. Okay, and that's likened to Rome, where the woman looking down, sitting down on the floor, the woman in captivity, that's the Jewish woman in Yerushalayim, under the rule of Rome. So that's what was coined by the Romans. And of course, that was a great event for them, that they thought they were on top. But we know God has the last laugh. Where is Rome today? No longer exists. Geographically, it's there, but that's not the Roman nation today. We're Am Yisrael Chai, and we're the nation of eternity. If we look through the prophecies before this barren woman of our Haftarah, okay, and remember it opens up with the words, Roni Akara, okay? Be joyful, the barren woman is Yerushalayim, that's not yet settled. But there's reason in the future to see the Jews coming back, to see Jerusalem being built. Israel has to be developed. You have to widen the pegs and cords of the tents in order to open up a Merkaz Klita, a ministry of structures of absorption. Ki Yaminu Small Tifrotzi, the Jewish people are going to spread out to the Yamin and to the small, and our seed will inherit the Gentiles and nations, and all the desolate cities are going to be settled. That's what he says here in verse 3 of our Haftarah. And today, you don't have to have 20/20 vision to travel the country and see, wow, we are living in a period of the fulfillment of the words of Yeshayahu and many others. Yerushalayim is being built all over the place. Ken, I want to share with you a short anecdote in a moment about the Shavuya. But I want to see now 4 prophecies. What do you want to say?
No, I just had to ask a question. Sorry, did it say that inheriting the other nations?
Yes, it says that we're going to be overcoming the difficulties of other nations.
Just the difficulties?
They're no longer going to be ruling over us. Yeah, it says in verse 4. In the verse 3, V'zarech goyim yirash. Whatever nations were ruling over us here in the land of Israel, we will overcome them. That's what it says here.
Overcome, okay.
Yirash, inherit, overcome them. There are several meanings that the word yirash can, some could mean, it could mean chase them out, drive them out.
I was kind of thinking it's, funny how you have Chabad all over the world already, I guess, when the Messiah is here.
Yeah, but they're not ruling over other nations in the Philippines or in Southern Korea. Here we're talking about the land of Israel.
I'm saying we already have infrastructure being set up for it.
There's no doubt that we're for that. My dear friends, let's look at one prophecy, then you'll understand about this barren woman of our Parsha. Look back at chapter 49. In this prophecy of Isaiah, in chapter 49, verses 14 to 15, you can now better understand our prophecy. The prophet says in verse 14 of chapter 49, Vatomer Tzion Azavani Hashem. Okay? Tzion is Bat Tzion, as we're going to see, because we're going to talk about a woman in the next pasuk. And she's so full of pain that what happened? Just like a husband abandoned a wife, Azavani Hashem, God abandoned me. That's what Israel feels like. But Isaiah gives us a prophecy likened to a woman. A woman is very, very delicate. And when she doesn't have support, she doesn't have a husband with her, her husband has abandoned her, it's very painful. That's the expression here, okay, that we see. Hatishkach isha ula merachem bemitna gam ele tishkachna v'ochin lo ishkachech. Could it be that God also forgets us? It can't be. It can't be. Just like what? A woman will never forget her children, the fruit of her stomach, so too God will never forget Bat Tzion. So you have to understand, in these psukim here, when the prophet is talking about the woman in this pasuk, on this case, it's likened to God and not Bat Tzion. But in the further psukim, as we see, God explains to Bat Tzion why he cannot forget her. Why he cannot forget her? Verse 16. Do you know what a Hein al kapayim chakotich? On the palm of my hand, God says in verse 16. On the palm of my hand, God says to Bat Tzion, I can forget you. Of chapter 49. Okay?
49.
Okay, that's what I said for chapter 49. Okay? And you see there, on the palm of my hand, who is engraved on the palm of my hand? It's like a tattoo. God is engraved, Bat Tzion, in this metaphor, on the palm of a hand. There's no way God is going to forget her. Therefore, Hashem says to Bat Tzion in verse 18, again, the image of Israel is likened to a woman, and she's called Bat Tzion. Se'isa viveinayich, or re'is, a famous song from these words. Lift up your eyes around you and see. Kulam nikbetzu v'olach. The Jews are gathered from everywhere. From America and Europe, and from Australia, and from Canada. They're all gathering to you. So we see here, just like a woman, that her children, she's been abandoned, her children are not there, so too Zion will stop being a woman that senses that she's been abandoned. It's a very, very delicate situation when we study this chapter and understand, wow, the pain, the difficulty of a woman who deserves support, but she was abandoned. That's what Israel was like for the years that we were in the Galut. So here we see an example that Israel is likened to a woman called Bat Tzion, going through a difficult situation, but God assures her, I will never forget you. Because you to me are like a tattoo imprinted on the palm of my hand. I see you all the time. You wash your hands once in a while. You see the palm of your hand? So therefore God also looks at the palm of his hand as if. Prophecy number 2 that was brought to my attention by Rav Samet in his article here. Let's look at chapter 50, the next chapter. By the way, all of these we read in the 7 Haftarot of Consolation between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. Okay? Here, when we skip to chapter 50, and we see a second prophecy where the Tanakh is comparing again Israel to Bat Tzion, Israel to a woman. Here in chapter 50, if you look at the opening verse, Ko Amar Hashem, okay? Eze Sefer Kritut Imchem. Okay? What kind of book of divorce, of cutting up of your mother, Asher Shilachtia, and so on. Here, a divorce is made. In other words, in this prophecy, what is described? A woman that thinks, well, her husband divorced her. That's what Sefer Kritut is. That is the term used in the Chumash for what we know in the Mishnaic word of a get, a bill of divorce, get, and therefore we have a Mishnah tractate called Mesachet Gitin, the plural of get, very good. Whereas the language in the Chumash, in the Devarim, Sefer Kritut, a book that cuts, separates the two. It's clear cut. They're no longer bonded together. So here the prophet uses the same language. And in this description here, a woman senses that her husband divorced her. Okay? In other words, she feels abandoned. She feels alone. And what does the prophet want to say in the words of God? Never, ever will Zion be forgotten. Bat Tzion will never be forgotten. She is engraved, like we said before, in the palm of the hand of Hashem. And as a proof, the prophet explains here that God says to Zion that she's not a divorcee. She's not a divorcee. She's only divorced from the home of Hashem, the house of Hashem, the palace of God. She's kicked out of the country. But a divorce is a clear-cut division. No. We're sent out for a certain time. So here too, in these psukim, we see exactly like the former one, Israel's compared to a woman. She's going through a delicate time. Some of you know, a woman could be very emotional. Her tears could be very close, as Chazal say. When we marry and we go through our first stages of our mistakes with married life, and we notice that, wow, she was insulted by me and I didn't realize I didn't want to insult her. And you see her tears coming out and she's crying or she's holding it in, then it'll explode a few days later. We have to be very gentle. Okay? I know you were in the locker room, in the gymnasium, in the court playing sports the other day. I know how you speak with your friend in the locker room, you two guys from the hockey club. I know. But when you go and marry a woman, it's not like your locker room friend. That you don't talk to her that way. You have to be very soft and gentle, and so on. Let's look at prophecy number 3 in chapter 51, that it too deals with a woman, the proverb, the metaphor of a woman. Chapter 51, this too we read in the summertime. And let's look at verses 17 to 23 if you can. Here, again, the prophet is looking at Yerushalayim, calling her a woman, but Yerushalayim is destroyed. What does the prophet say? Hitorri, Hitorri, wake up, Yerushalayim, Israel, or Zion. Kumi Yerushalayim, asher shatid mi'ad Hashem et kos chamato. Wow. Yerushalayim here is a woman. She's compared, Zion is compared to a woman that's been poisoned. She drank a poisonous cup of something terrible or something that was drugged to her. She was given a cup with poison or some drug inside it that caused her to be a drunkard woman. Okay? She's no longer rational. She's no longer sharp in her mind and thinking. Okay? And here again, she's not drunken from wine, but rather from a drug put into her cup. And what does she do? She roams around, as you see in verses 17, 18, and 19. She roams around disgraced. She runs around that she's like hefker. She has no strong situation. And this is a very traumatic time for a woman. That is the similarity. What would you think Israel would be likened to? A woman that's been drugged or poisoned. That's very traumatic. That Zion is experiencing this situation, being ejected from the land in the Galut, roaming around from one country to the other country until this pogrom ends, until that pogrom ends, this anti-Semitic act and that anti-Semitic act. And God is allowing the enemies of Israel to do what has to be needed until we wake up and come back to the land of Israel. So here we see that after the Khurban, the destruction, Isaiah compares the woman, the Israel, to a woman that's going through such pain, such difficulties, being torn apart from one place to another place. All this is giving us background information, understanding that there are several prophecies that Isaiah uses the similarity of a woman who's going through these terrible things, that she represents Zion, the woman in Israel, but that woman ultimately will be consoled. There's nechama, there's consolation. And now the fourth prophecy I want to share with you, which is close to the words hitorri, hitorri. By the way, who adopted these words, hitorri, hitorri? We said that in our shul. Rabbi Shlomo Alkavetz, when he authored the beautiful poetry of Lecha Dodi. Wow. I want to dedicate this next part of the shur to a young girl that was buried two nights ago in northern Israel that my wife and I went to visit the family to pay a consolation call. And her name was Tiferet, glory. And I want to dedicate this to her soul, to the consolation of her parents, her brothers, her sisters, aunts, and uncles. Chapter 52, the Tanakh says, Uri, Uri, a command. The prophet turns to Zion in the feminine gender. Do you see this? Uri, Uri, wake up, wake up. Lifshi uzech, Tzion, wear your strength, Zion. Lifshi bigdei tifartech, wear your clothing of glory, of your glory, Yerushalayim, Ira Kodesh. This girl, I'll tell you a little about her. My son, who was mobilized, of course, Yaakov Yair is his name. He's 23 now, 23 or 24. He was hiking after the army service for about 11 months in India, in Sri Lanka. He bought a motorbike and he traveled like 8,000 or 9,000 kilometers and traveling, which is quite a lot over a long time. And he went surfing in Sri Lanka. You should know India is filled, I'll say a third time, filled with Israelis, young men and girls, hiking, searching, having fun, hiking and so on. There's beautiful places that God created in these countries. And thousands and thousands of Israelis. I was told by someone in India, emptied out. The major tourism is Israelis. They emptied, everyone came back to go to the army. For about a period of a year, this group that he was with included this young girl, Tiferet is her name, and she was a leader. She was a happy-go-lucky girl, and she was logistically so talented, and she was a woman of initiative and happiness, and she gave everyone respect and their place, and so on. And she just loved hiking and trekking. And so he knew her for almost a period of a year. At different times over the course of the year, they met and they traveled together with big groups of people and so on and so forth. And even in Sri Lanka, where he went surfing, he saw her there. And already was published right after the murder, the butchering of Jews, that she was missing. She was at that, what is it called? That big affair, what was it? Like a festival?
Yeah, Supernova.
What is it called?
Supernova Festival.
Supernova?
Yes.
She was there. She was abroad for 1.5 years, hiking. And last, she was in Australia. And she came home right before the holidays to be with her family for 1 month and then go back to Australia. My son said that he met her when he went on a vacation for a few days from work. He works in construction in Samaria. He met her in the Kinneret area. And the bad news was brought after many days of the family being in such indefinite understanding. Was she murdered? Was she taken into captivity? Was she taken hostage? They really went through a lot of affliction. And there's a fine family in the city of Harish. Harish is a new city, 20 years old, just north of Hadera, Pardes Chana. The first time when I was inside there, gigantic. There are about 15,000 families living there. Can you imagine? Families. And all types of religious people and other types. Everyone is there. And it's all new housing. It's a new, beautiful city. I have a few nephews. My wife has living there in a Garin Torani. So my son found out that she was found. It was public knowledge. And he was already up north. He got a green light from his commander. And he borrowed a car from someone in the unit. And he came to the funeral. That's how we found out about it. 2 nights ago. And he knew her well. And he told us what a big neshama she was. Her name is Tiferet, mentioned in his pasuk. So we as parents decided that, you know what, I think we should make an effort to go comfort the family because our son knew her well. So to drive. That's why we left early. That's why I left early yesterday. We arrived about 5 o'clock. We went to arrive way before they start mincha, otherwise you're not going to get any time. The place was packed. There must have been 150 people. Brothers, sisters, mother, father, in different... everyone's sitting in a different place, in the apartment, in the garden. And there are tons of people like myself as well, that never knew the girl. May God avenge her blood. And I was waiting. I was like in the second row. I was waiting to get to the first row so I can share with the father. He's an attorney and she's a teacher. And see, all different types of people are coming with and without kippot. And I was waiting. It took about 30 minutes until they comforted and moved. And I was sat up front. I said, I don't say shalom. We don't say shalom to people that are sitting in Shiva, right? They're not at peace. I introduced myself, who I am, my wife. And I said, my son Yaakov was with your daughter for almost a year. Then I started talking about how special she was, and his eyes opened up. You see, you gave him comfort. You gave him a good idea. And then he says to me, I imagine there were thousands of people at the funeral. He says, your son came over to me last night at the funeral. He remembers my son. How does he know my son? After not seeing their daughter for about a year plus, they went to a rabbi and asked a question. Is it okay that we go to Chutz La'aretz to see her? They didn't want to leave Israel. And we're going to see here that when the Jewish people are in the Galut, they're considered into captivity. The rabbi says to the parents, if your daughter, God forbid, would be in captivity, would you go visit her? So they answered, yes, we would go see her. So they went to Sri Lanka for 3 days to see her. At that time, my son was there. So we met the parents. And apparently he was fond of my son. And he remembered my son when he came over to give him a kiss or a hug after the funeral last night amongst the throngs of people. So we said, we're the parents of Yaakov. And we shared with him Tiferet on a big banner outside the apartment in the front of the building is a quote from here. Uri, Uri, lifshei uzech Tzion, lifshi bigdei tifartech. Shlomo Alkovitz also used these words in the Lechad Dodi. So here we see Hit'ah, and the second pasuk, it was from the second pasuk. Hitnari me'afar. Okay? Rise yourself, shake yourself off from the dust. When Israel's in the Galut, we're in the dust. Kumi shavi Yerushalayim. Go and dwell in Yerushalayim. And why? Hitpatchi mosrech tzavarech shviya bat Tzion. When you were subjected with your neck and you were like in servitude, you were a shviya. What is shviya? Captivity. So the parents didn't know if she was in captivity or not. Must have been hurting day after day, not knowing what was exactly the situation, having the doubt. And I understand there was some sort of yes and no sense of relief that they found her body, which took so many days to find and so many days to identify the terrible situation. And here we see what is the novelty here that the prophet is telling us that Israel is compared to a woman, Bat Tzion, but in captivity. We all know some basic history. Rav Samet writes it in this article as well, that when women would be kidnapped and taken into captivity, we have a lot of halachic debate in the Talmud of women that fell into captivity regarding thereafter, would they be for marriage and this or that. But certainly, a woman is so delicate that when she's in a state of captivity, that's such a hard situation. It's hard enough for a man, even more so for a woman. And here the prophet says, Bat Tzion, the woman, Israel in the Galut is like in captivity. We don't have our freedom. We don't have our naturalness. We're so limited. Our mindset, our mental faculties, our bodies are not even like. Now the body of Israel is strong. When Rav Kook wrote in the 1930s a paragraph regarding the youth of Israel working out and building their bodies, when some parts of Haredi scholars read that book, that's not part of Torah. burn the book. They wanted to burn the book of Orot because of that. Now they better understand that we have a strong army. I heard a clip last night on the radio. Some Haredi men, there's so many of them doing chesed, came down to the south with food. And the soldier talks to the Haredi Jew, wants to say thank you to what's your name? And he answers, name? Who has a name? We're Am Yisrael. That's what he answered. That's what he answered to the soldiers. We're Am Yisrael. I'm not an individual. We're not. We're the nation. We're here. Isn't that touching? Isn't that beautiful? And so many of our Haredi brothers are doing so much chesed all the time, ever since the war broke out. Especially the most difficult part of identification, which is so hard. And it's such a big imposition on the rabbinate of the army and so many people working in it, it's not even enough, and such difficulties. So we should never know, but Israel here is compared to a woman taken into captivity. Of course, when she gets out of captivity, she has to change her clothing, as we see here. She has to make herself beautiful. And Chazal even talk about that if she gets out on Shabbos, then she can even change her clothing on Shabbos and make herself beautiful on Shabbos. So here we see that in chapter 52, the mitzvah of the prophet is Bat Tzion, coming to light, leaving captivity, coming to the land of Israel. So we can see here all these prophecies, the 4 prophecies that we've seen today, are prophesizing Bavel as opposed to the land of Israel. Bat Bavel as opposed to Bat Tzion. Galut as opposed to Geula. All we see here, the comparisons, until we get to our chapter. Roni Akara. How does Israel, the woman of Israel, she feels Akara. Now, Akara is a woman that cannot have a child. Now, is her feeling that she cannot have a child because she biologically cannot have a child? And the answer is no, because she's been abandoned. She's been abandoned. She has been taken out of her natural habitat. Okay? And that, of course, I think it could be that when we read one prophecy after the other, as we've been discussing, this could be the epitome, really the height of all difficult prophecies, that the feeling of a woman who's alone and that she's an akara, she can't give birth because she doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have the ability, not because bodily difficulty that she has, because she's in a galut. Her husband is not with her. She's not in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, if her husband left her for this time, that's the feeling. But God says, Roni, be joyful. Okay? Happy days are going to come. And what's going to happen now is you're going to be more in number more than you were before you went out to exile. What will your numbers be when you come back and build? And all the verbs you see here in verse 2, urban planning, harchivi mekom olech. Look at the verbs, harchivi, harichi, chazeki, 3 words. Widen your tents, lengthen them, strengthen them. Why? Jews going to come back to the land of Israel. And now look at all the verbs in verse 3. Kiaminis motiv fruits, you're going to burst out. Vizarech goyim yirash, you will drive out the nations. V'yorim nishamot yoshivo, you're going to be able to settle those desolate cities. You're a little slow. You're a little fearful. You're a little reluctant. The new is accompanied with doubts. How will it happen? How do we join the process? Okay? Many Orthodox Jews didn't want to join the process because let's say you're digging for oil. There's a very important article I forgot to bring from Rav Kook in which Sefer Mamarei Ariyah. When you go dig a well and you want to get water, there are times that you dig a well and you get clean water, and there are times you dig a well and you get some muddy water. And there are people that when they saw the state of Israel, They likened it to like muddy. I don't want this muddy water, because my conception of redemption is Mashiach. Everything will be okay. Everything will be glatt kosher. No problems. This prime minister doesn't put on tefillin. That prime minister eats shrimp with the president of America. What's going on? It's like muddy water. But we know that the redemption comes through difficult ways and not straight ways, and we're used to it. And we know that even now, with the war that has happened, and we got a big slap in our face, in this terrible surprise, we know that 200 is also part of the Gula. There's no doubt that we're ready for a birth of something big to happen on behalf of the Jewish people. We're ready to merit, to see a new existence, a new situation here. There's no doubt. What we were is not what we're going to be now. We're going to be something new, with all this solidarity, all this unity, and all this nation, and all this kindness. The nation is going berserk in so much kindness, so much love, as opposed to all the division that was partly fake news. It was a group, and they reached animosity, unfortunately. And we also have to learn how to re-love them and make sure we don't show animosity to them, God forbid. And they talked about, people not going to come to the army and this and that. Today I heard a lieutenant general, Sgan Aluf, the head of a Air Force base. The head of an Air Force base, I don't have to tell you what the Air Force has been doing. Thousands and thousands of attacks. And everything is so exact and so precise. The objective of what they're going to hit is so precise. Everything, amazing precision. And this journalist she asked him, how was the turnout when the call of duty was asked? He says, people came that haven't come for years. I called up this amount, and this amount showed up. Everyone came. Pilots, technicians, groundwork people that set up the planes, the people that put the bombs in everyone came, but more. People flew in from all over the world. And they came back. There's no such thing as they're going to refuse to come back. Because deep down inside, we're one nation. We love one another. That's the truth. We're one soul. And here the prophet is getting Israel ready. Widen. Be lengthier, wider. Don't have fear. Don't have reluctance. You're not going to be embarrassed. It's not going to be a failure. And things are going to work out. Therefore, this prophecy is really the happiness. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. We're seeing the Gula in our eyes, yet through pain. A lot of difficulty. There's so many thousands of families connected to the 1,300 that were killed. And we don't know who's still going to be healed, God willing, in the hospitals, and the people that went through such trauma that they went through. It's very painful. It's a painful way of bringing Gula, but you know what? It's like the story I told you in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Meir, when he came back from the middle of the Yom Kippur War, and he came to Rav Tzion, and he was busy burying the dead for the first few days of the war, and there's blood over his uniform. And he's about to ask Rav Tzion the cook, how can this happen? And Rav Kook answered him with a question, is there a contract? Is there a contract? Is there a contract? As I explained, Rav Tzion meant God never signed a contract that is going to bring the redemption without problems, without difficulty, without pain. It's going to come through affliction. Some of you know that some of the great Amoritic scholars said, let the Gula come, but I don't want to be around. I don't want to be around because I won't be able. So we are learning about this through the Tanakh, through the Talmud, through learning of Emunah. We're strengthening our minds. We're strengthening our mindsets, our souls, are connecting both to the grief, yet to the roar, the march of the Israeli army, what we're doing and how many people are ready to go in. The morale is so high, so high. We've never seen this ever in the state of Israel. And we're hoping, B'ezrat Hashem, that we're going to be able to supply the spiritual power, because we're at the front also. Our study, Torah study, our tefillot, our tilim, our chesed, our smiles to one another, our helping out of one another, cooperation to one another, all of that is making the Jewish people stronger and stronger. There's no doubt. So we're going to stop here, B'ezrat Hashem, and wish ourselves that when we read this Haftarah, what are we going to feel? That even though there are difficult times, there's someone called Kadosh Yisrael, the holiness of Israel, the God. And he's our Goel. He's our Redeemer. We say it every day, and it's mentioned here in this Haftarah. V'goalech Kadosh Yisrael Elohei Kol Haaretz. He's the boss. He's the God of all the planet of Earth. And it could be that he hid his face for a moment, like we saw then. There's no doubt that when the war ends, there's going to be a lot of investigations going on, whose failures it was. But we believe that even if there are going to be failures and that people are going to be sent away, fired, big people, no doubt in my mind, and many others. But at the same time, God's chesed, the kindness, is olam, forever. So many brave stories of men and women, that many were successful to save so many people, yet they lost their lives. And I'll end with the following. The Rabbi of Psagot, Rabbi Whiten is his name, he buried his 33-year-old son, Yisrael Amichai. 33 years old, the father of 6 children. They went to live in an irreligious kibbutz opposite the Gaza Strip to strengthen the people there. Many, 6, 7 years ago. I don't remember exactly how long ago. Keren Shalom. And the opening of the war happened right there as well. And the Kitat Konenut, the defense team of the civilian defense team of the kibbutz, which was made up of both some of these religious Jews that came from Merkaz or of Kuk and other yeshivot like it to live there. They were very strong, very, very strong. And as he's shooting at terrorists and then grabbing place to protect himself, he messages his wife, be happy with the kids, take out the potato chips, take out the chocolates, the fanekotam, give them anything and everything, but be calm and cool, everything is okay. And they're doing the best, and he saved the lives of people, and then he was shot and killed. The father, I remember him when I was a student, Machon Meir, he studied Merkaz Arav, and then became a great rabbi. He's a rabbi of the Yishuv, and he teaches in Beit El Yeshiva. En route to the north, my wife said, Menachem, let's listen to this clip when he spoke. When they found out about his death, he and his wife spoke a few days before the funeral. They found out, and it would take us several days. So he says that his son reached in his heroic activities the saving of lives that will bring eternity. The amount of people that he saved that are going to live right now, and the children they're going to have, and the grandchildren they're going to have, in merit of Yisrael Amichai, he reached a level of eternity. Because he's bringing life of hundreds and hundreds of years into the world, because he saved those people. This is a father that just lost a son, and that's what he's thinking of, the greatness of his son. In other words, it's a very trying and testing time, yet he's full of faith that this is Hashem's will. It's difficult, it's painful. And the mother says that the son was born on Holocaust Day. And the name they gave him, Yisrael Amichai. The Brit Milah. The Brit Milah was on Holocaust Day. And at the middle of the Su'udah, the meal of the Brit Milah, that we have a siren that sounds for the memorial of the 6 million brothers and sisters. So they all stood up and were quiet in the middle of the Su'udah Brit Milah. And that was the reason they called their child Yisrael Amichai. My nation lives on Holocaust Day. And he was murdered on a day like a Holocaust when 1,300 Jews lost their lives. Yet we're proud of these holy Jews that they didn't run away. They ran into battle. I heard a story. It was Ofakim. A woman knows that her son is in the army there, or one of the special units. She goes running to him. I got to help him out. She doesn't even have a pot in her hand. She just runs to the area. And then she finds a car and she starts bringing into the car wounded people to the medical place. She goes back and an older woman, a heroic woman. She goes into the area of shooting and fire and she evacuates wounded civilians and soldiers. Who heard of such a thing? You heard of do you remember the couple in Sderot that were, I don't know how many hours, 48 hours they were held hostages by terrorists? Do you remember that story? She fed the terrorists food. She's a well-known woman in, I think it's Sderot or Afakim, no, Sderot or Afakim. One of the two cities. She's a well-known woman for always doing entertaining and hosting. And she even fed the terrorists. And thank God they didn't kill them. And then the special SWAT teams found out exactly where they are in the apartment. They busted through and they killed, you heard about, they killed the terrorists. And the couple was saved. That was the beginning of the war. Unbelievable, heroic stories we're hearing, gentlemen. I mean, books and books are going to be read, are going to be written about this. B'ezrat Hashem, we have to feed on to this heroism, this courage, and B'ezrat Hashem, Am Yisrael Chai, we're getting stronger. Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.